Hello and welcome to my closet. We are here in this itty-bitty little tiny cubbyhole of a closet today to talk about clothes, believe it or not. And as always, I came prepared, but this time not with notes. I brought a couple of passages to share as we talk about clothes today. So, hello and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Katie. I recently graduated with a master's degree in something called fashion studies, which is basically like the history, sociology, anthropology, economics, all of the things of fashion. And as I've graduated and am looking for things to do with my degree, because there are some slim pickings out in the Midwest where I now live that are related to my degree, I decided it was just time to start talking about clothes and fashion history and fashion theory, and what better place to start than my own closet. I have a professor who talks about personal archives and how one of the best places to start when you want to think about the history of fashion, and in my case, the theory of fashion, is with what it is that you already have. So in his case, he's a historian and he often has students look at personal family photos. And as somebody who teaches fashion studies, I often have my students go and look at their own wardrobes, but it's been a long time since I've critically thought and looked at my wardrobe. Eventually, I want to do a kind of like closet clean out and try on of everything. But today specifically, I want to talk about sentimentality and the idea that clothing can carry memory. Now, I'm sure that this is something that you've experienced before in your life, even if it's not something anybody has pointed out and said directly, but our clothes, they hold memories. Not only do they have the memories that we attach to them, like this blue skirt that I bought at a mall in San Jose with my best friend. It's from Uniqlo, and it was the last time that we went to Fanime San Jose together back in our cosplay days. But clothes also hold their own memories. And we'll get to this a little bit later, but there is a concept where wrinkles from the wearing of a garment, like wrinkles that might show up in the elbows of a jacket, those are also called memories. So not only do our clothes hold our memories, but our clothes hold the memories of the movements that they've been through, of how we wore them and what we wore them to. And to just kind of prove my point, I want to read to you a piece that was written in 1999 called Worn Worlds by Peter Stallybrass. He recounts the presentation of a paper that he once gave and how in the midst of presenting this paper, he suddenly came to a stop. He was quite literally overcome and unable to read, and an embarrassing silence followed. And it wasn't until he began reflecting on what caused that embarrassing silence did he come to realize it was because of the clothes that he was wearing. He reflects on the death of one of his close friends. Alan and I had always exchanged clothes, having shared a house together for 2 years in which we were communal in just about everything. When Alan died, Jen gave me his American baseball jackets, but she also gave me the jacket of Alan's which I had most coveted. This was the jacket I was wearing when I read my paper on the individual. A paper that was, in many ways, an attempt to invoke Alan. But at no time in the writing of it did I feel any answering response. Like the paper, Alan was dead. And then as I began to read, I was inhabited by his presence, taken over. If I wore the jacket, Alan wore me. He was there in the wrinkles of the elbow, wrinkles that in the technical jargon of sewing are called memory. He was there in the stains at the very bottom of the jacket. He was there in the smell of the armpits. The magic of cloth, I came to believe, is that it receives us, receives our smells, our sweat, our shape even. And when our parents, our friends, our lovers die, the clothes in their closets still hang there, holding their gestures. Both reassuring and terrifying, touching the living with the dead, but for me, more reassuring than terrifying, although I have felt both emotions. So clearly you can see that this is something people have been talking about since fashion studies really began as a discipline in the 1990s, as this was written in 1999. And although he's talking about the shape of the body and the wearing of clothes on the body and how that leaves an imprint of the person, clothes also have an effect on our memory, and they are used in part as stewards of memory. And so today I want to take you through a little tour of some of the most sentimental pieces in my closet, because sentimentality is of course focused around memory. But I think this closet's a little bit too small to do that in here, so we're gonna hop into the other room. I have a collection of very sentimental clothes here to share with you today, and I'm going to go over them and share with you their stories, why they're sentimental to me. I've organized these from most sentimental to least sentimental, which was really difficult for me to do because I am sentimental about pretty much everything in my wardrobe, and in fact, just picking these items was really difficult. I spent a whole evening standing in front of my wardrobe, sharing with my partner, my husband, why every single item in my closet has some kind of story. And so picking the ones that had like the most sentimental stories was tough, but hopefully I've done a good enough job, and let's get into it. So first, we have an old O'Reilly's t-shirt that is stretched out, covered in paint, and definitely fading all over the place. I'm not sure you can even read these letters anymore. And the reason why I picked this as my most sentimental piece of clothing is because this used to belong to my husband. When my husband and I first got together, he was working at O'Reilly's in Southern California, and we dated long distance for 2 years before we decided that he should move up to Northern California with me. And one of the big issues about moving up to live with me was that he was worried about getting a job. And so he managed to actually transfer O'Reilly stores from one in Southern California to one close by where I lived. So he was able to move in with me, and we lived together for the first time in 2 years of a relationship that was long distance. It was about 400 miles from door to door. But this shirt is sentimental to me for more than just that reason. I think that this shirt really represents not only the growth that we've had in our relationship, but also the way that our lives have changed. My husband, he was a college dropout, and he wasn't sure what he wanted to study. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do as a career. When I met him, when he used to use this shirt as a part of his work uniform, and I was also just kind of messing around in community college, not sure what I was doing. And now we've both had years of professional experience in our related fields. I just graduated with my master's degree in fashion studies. I just got a teaching position, and my husband is pursuing his master's degree after getting professional experience. So while there's nothing wrong with, entry-level jobs, with manual labor jobs, I just think that this shirt is a really big reminder of where we've come from and how far we've come, both as people and as a couple. This is the shirt that I wear to bed every night too, so it's very comfortable, it's very well worn in, very well loved, and yeah, I'm going to keep wearing this t-shirt until the day it falls apart. That's number one. Next, we have a sweatshirt that you all know and love. It is the sweatshirt that has made me recognizable on the streets of New York. We have my California sweatshirt, and I will love this also until the day I die. This shirt, I need a better way to show you guys what I'm holding, because my arm is going to get tired. It's also dirty. This sweatshirt is dirty. It needs to be washed. I don't know. Can you see that right there? Oops, I wear it a lot. In talking about the way that our lives have changed and how proud I am of the both of us for having grown as people, this sweatshirt represents a lot of that for me. I wanted nothing more when I was in community college than to get into UC Berkeley. I was dead set on getting into Berkeley. So I worked really hard. I applied once, got rejected, applied again, and finally got into UC Berkeley. And this was all happening during the pandemic. So I received my offer letter when we were still in lockdown. And so I didn't have an opportunity to get to do the things that you do as a new admit student. I never had the opportunity to have a visiting students day. I was online for the first two semesters, the first year of my time at Berkeley. So I was already a non-traditional student, being older and coming from a community college, that I just really wanted to hold on to anything that made me feel like a student. One thing about me is that I love secondhand clothing, and I love estate sales and dead people's things. By some kind of luck, by some kind of just gift from the universe, when I got into UC Berkeley, on estatesales.net popped up an estate sale in my town that had all of this UC Berkeley merchandise. So, ostensibly the person who had passed was a UC Berkeley alumni. And so we got to go to that estate sale, myself and James. But I bought quite a few things, but this ended up being my all-time favorite piece from the things that I bought. Not only is it very warm and comfortable, but also this design that just says California. UC Berkeley does not make this in their merch anymore. So a little bit of backstory. I know I'm talking a lot in this video. That's the point of it. So I'm not going to excuse myself for that. UC Berkeley was not always called UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. And that's the naming convention for all of the UCs. It's UC, the city that they're from. So like UCLA, UC San Diego, so on and so forth. The interesting thing about that is that Berkeley was actually the first UC, the first University of California. So before they founded the second UC, which was UCLA, they simply called it University of California. Hence, the nickname for UC Berkeley is just Cal, or California. So the time in which this merch was made was before they stopped just producing things that said California on them in reference to UC Berkeley and shifted to calling it UC Berkeley or University of California, Berkeley on their merch. I could be entirely wrong. There could be some pieces that still say this, but I have never found any in my experience. It's usually the big Cal logo. And in fact, a couple of people have reached out to me since wearing this and posting pictures of it, asking me where they could find one because they couldn't find one themselves. But, this is vintage. It's not something I can reproduce necessarily. I have worn this sweatshirt through finishing my bachelor's degree, through finishing my master's degree and my master's thesis. And I was also recognized on the streets of New York because of this sweatshirt, because I wear it so frequently. It's probably one of the most recognizable pieces of my wardrobe, like on the internet or out in the world. Someone came up to me as I was on my way to class in my master's degree in New York and came up to me and talked to me about like ADHD and returning to school. And they said that they knew it was me because I was wearing my California sweatshirt. So this is also very representative of like the journey that I've been on and just kind of like the process of becoming the person that I enjoy being today and learning everything that I've learned about myself, about anthropology, about graduate school. It's been with me through such a formative time of my life that I don't think I'll ever be able to let it go. Next, we have a dress. This one is a little bit more recent than the rest. This is a dress that my mother bought for me at a boutique in Mendocino, California, just last summer in 2023. So it hasn't had a lot of time to develop memories in it yet, but one of the reasons why it is so close to the front of the sentimentality tier list, if we shall, is because I have done some pretty big life events in this dress. I mean, first of all, it comes from one of my favorite cities in California, or I should say towns, it's really not a city. And it represents a summer where I was really going through it and I was taking the time to reconnect with myself and try to heal from some of the things that I've been going through. And also the fact that my mommy bought it for me, which makes me love it very much. But I also wore this dress to the one and only concert I've ever been to in New York, where I got to see Hozier play. And if you know anything about me, Hozier is probably one of my all-time favorite musicians, artists. I mean, it's like a three-way tie between Hozier followed by My Chemical Romance, which will be coming up later. But beyond all of that, this is also the dress that I wore for my rehearsal dinner for my wedding. So while it's only been in my wardrobe for a little over a year, it has seen some like pretty big things. That Hozier concert is probably one of the highlights of my 2 years in New York. It's like a core memory at this point. My husband and I got to go together. It was just such an incredible show, a special show too, because it was his first time playing in Madison Square Garden, and he brought his father on to play the drums for the very last song that they played that night. Just an evening that is full of so many good memories and good emotions that I had to put it close up to the sentimentality list. And then also kind of reinforcing this idea of sentimentality, this idea of like good feelings of my relationship. A lot of these have to do with my relationship because I wore it for my rehearsal dinner, and there were quite a few Hozier songs in our playlist for the actual wedding itself. So I look at it and I can't not feel those special feelings about getting to share my life with someone I really love. Wow, I did not expect this video to be so sappy, but given the fact that I'm talking about sentimentality and memory, I should have figured that, but I'm a little bit like flustered and embarrassed at the moment, so we're gonna move on. Next we have another t-shirt. If you are also an emo kid like I am, you'll recognize this. This is the t-shirt from the Fabulous Killjoys Danger Days tours of My Chemical Romance. I do not remember the year of this tour because it happened back in high school, which was over a decade ago. So I cannot recall the exact year, sometime before 2013 and after whenever that album came out. But the interesting thing about this shirt is that I have no memory of going to this concert. I have pictures, I obviously have the shirt, I have like maybe one vague memory of the actual concert itself, but I don't remember who I went with, I don't remember buying the tickets, I don't remember anything special about the show. So you may be asking yourself, Katie, why are you so sentimental about this shirt? Well, I mean, it is one of the first concerts I ever went to. It is my all-time favorite band, which is My Chemical Romance. It's from the time period in which I was into My Chemical Romance. Now, hear me out. I still love them. I still love their music. I do not listen to them the same way that I did when I was a teenager. And I also don't have any of the like MCR merch or like clothing items that I had from when I was a teenager listening to MCR, except for this t-shirt. I have other My Chemical Romance t-shirts that I've bought since then, but this is the one piece of remaining like band merch items from my teenage years, and actually also one of the only remaining pieces of clothing from my teenage years. I cannot tell you what happened to the rest of them. They've just walked out of my life after a certain amount of time and never came back. So this is like the one piece of clothing that remains from that. And it's also like one of my only, until recently, from going to concerts, like pieces of clothing that was appropriate for going to like other related events like emo nights at bars or at clubs and things like that. So it reminds me of my teenagehood. It reminds me of my teenage angst years, and I don't have a lot of that left, so this is something that sticks around to remind me of that. And now we have a very interesting piece that is obviously very different from the other pieces that I've shown you. You may not have seen me wear this dress in recent memory, and that's because it doesn't fit me, but this is one of the very first pieces of vintage I ever bought, or true vintage, I should say. This is a cotton plaid shirtwaist dress from the 1940s that I found in St. Louis on one of the trips from California to visit James's family because they live in the Midwest. And I had just gotten into the concept of wearing vintage. I started wearing vintage because I was struggling with my personal style. I was going back to school and I didn't have the time or money for cosplay, and cosplay was a really big way that I used to express myself. I still wanted to dress up in some way, but was trying to find a way that could translate into everyday life, and thus vintage. And it doesn't hurt that I also love the way that vintage looks. However, because I lived in the area that I did, and I didn't know very much about vintage, and it was something I was still getting into, I had a lot of new vintage pieces. So those are pieces that are produced new to look old. So things like from Unique Vintage, Collective, that kind of stuff. So when I got to go to a place, St. Louis, that is known for its vintage, I went vintage shopping for the very first time and found a piece of vintage that actually fit me, that I fell in love with. And so this was the very first piece that I bought. And I think that not only is it like just a cool moment in my life, but, you know, given the handle that I've gone by for many years, the vintage academic, I think that this says more than just Katie was finding her personal style. Clothing and sewing and cosplay and vintage has been a part of my life far longer than I gave it credit for when I decided to switch to studying fashion studies instead of anthropology. I kind of surprised myself when I did that, but holding on to material reminders of my long interest in vintage fashion and old clothes has kind of helped me understand myself a little bit better and kind of negotiate the way that my interests have changed and fluctuated over the years, because I've always been into this, and just because it didn't quite fit into the anthropology version of myself that I thought I was going to be when I went to undergrad, like, doesn't mean that it's not still significant. I don't know if any of that's making sense. I'm just kind of stream of consciousing it right now. I just think that this dress really represents a huge part of myself that I'm not going to say denied, but just like didn't know could be taken as seriously as it can be in fashion studies. So even though this piece no longer fits me, and it probably never will fit me, I think that it's going to remain in my wardrobe for as long as I can stand to keep it. There may come a day where I decide to sell it, that I decide it needs to live a life outside of my wardrobe, because I do believe that our clothes should be worn, but for now, I consider her a piece of my personal collection and the beginning of the trajectory that I am on now when it comes to having a master's degree, pursuing PhD research, and teaching fashion, all that kind of stuff. So, I love this dress so much. Speaking of new vintage, or also known as reproduction, we have a House of Foxy dress here that is meant to be similarly a 1920s shirtwaist dress. I have not worn this dress a lot, but I do consider it very sentimental because I wore it for my graduation from UC Berkeley. I know a lot of this has to do with school, but school is just such a huge part of me and my identity and how I kind of like see the world. I love school. I love research. I love theory. I really do. So I wore this dress for graduation because UC Berkeley's colors are blue and gold. And while I don't wear this dress often at all, in fact, that was the last time I wore it, and that was about 2.5 years ago, it's still really important to me because of that graduation. I've just had such a complicated relationship with school. I did not ever think I was going to graduate from college. It was something that the idea of going and finishing my bachelor's and graduating and moving on was an idea that formed very, very slowly while I was in community college. And even after I transferred to UC Berkeley, it was something I was afraid that I was never going to accomplish. I was constantly afraid that I was going to fail out of school, even though, historically I've actually done quite well at school. But that speaks so much to my experience as a teenager when I did fail out of high school and how much that experience lingers and informs the way that I see myself. So actually reaching the point of completion with my degree and getting to graduate was just so significant. I also wanted to wear this dress not only because, Berkeley's colors are blue and gold, but also because my grandmother went to UC Berkeley and she graduated from there. And I have some photos of her from her graduation. And I used this dress because its collar is very, very similar to the collar that she was wearing underneath her graduation robes. And so I used this to recreate some of her graduation photos. I never got to know that grandmother, so finding ways to connect with her through my clothing has always been really significant to me and understanding my family history. So that is why this one is here. Next, we have another bit of emo for us to talk about here. This is a t-shirt from the Emo Night Tour, which is a group of people who tour around the US and do emo nights at bars and clubs with a DJ and sometimes live bands, and they just play emo music, and I love that. This was gifted to me by my best friend who still lives in California, who is still 100% a full-on, head to toe dressed in black, only listens to emo music, emo kid. And I love that she is the resident emo kid of my life, because I'm not going to say emo was a phase for me, but I definitely don't hold on to it that much anymore. It's not as much of a part of my identity, but going to emo nights with this friend has kept my love of emo music alive. And I always wanted one of the t-shirts, and so she bought it for me in secret and gifted it to me one time when we were at emo night. Again, don't have a lot of things left over from when I was a teenager, and so the friend that bought this for me, we've been friends for, something like 17 years. We met shortly after my dad died, and that's how I keep track. But we've been friends for going on 17 years. She was my maid of honor at my wedding, and I have some things that she has gifted to me over the years, especially a lot of her drawings because she is a talented artist. But I don't have a lot of the teenager stuff left in terms of clothing. So this has kind of replaced that for me. And again, she just keeps my connection to emo music alive and well, and I really appreciate her for that. Okay, we got 4 more left. Next is this really pretty lacy, let's call it a vest. It's supposed to look like a corset, but it has none of the structure of a corset or a pair of stays. This is an item of clothing that has been in my mother's wardrobe for a very long time. I'd have to ask her exactly how long, but I have memories of this piece of clothing from maybe as young as 10 years old. And I remember getting to wear it for the first time when I was a teenager. I wanted to dress up nicely for some kind of event that was happening. And so my mom let me borrow this from her, and she doesn't wear it. So, over the years, it just kind of drifted into my closet. And while I have quite a few garments in my closet that belonged to my mom once upon a time, that belong to me now, I thought that this one would be a good representation of that connection that I have to my mom, especially because one of the ways that she and I connect is through clothing. We often send each other listings that we see on ThreadUp. We send each other pictures of our outfits. I remember sitting in my mother's bathroom, watching her get ready for the day, watching her do her makeup and learning how to do my makeup from her. and getting to go into her closet and touch and feel all the clothes that were her. I'm not going to say reminded me of her, they were her. And there are still some types of clothing, like big long broomstick skirts and silks, that make me feel as though I am getting a hug from my mom. When I decided that she was never going to wear this again, it became a part of my wardrobe, and I still don't wear it super often because I am not very good at styling it. It's still something that hangs around in my closet because it reminds me of my mom. I've spoken a lot about my grandmother. This piece belonged to my grandmother, and again, I didn't really get to know her as a person except for through photographs and through her clothing and some of her accessories. I have quite a few pieces of her clothing, and so it was really hard for me to pick just one, but I think this one is a good example of the kind of woman that she was, or at least the kind of woman that I've heard her to be. I also have some of just her daily wear, like her sweaters and her blouses, but I think this one shows her personality. So my grandmother was, in my imagination, just a bold and unafraid woman. She had an unfortunate relationship with my grandfather and they divorced, but that never stopped her. In fact, I think that might have freed her from really living a full life. I have stories of her traveling overseas, taking my mom across Europe, of really trying to enrich my mother's life through travel. And she also was one of the first people in her family to graduate with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. She went on to become a teacher and she took care of my mother. And this skirt is one of the pieces that she bought while she was abroad. This is a skirt from Spain, and not only is it meaningful to me because it reminds me of my grandmother, but I think it's also a beautiful piece of workmanship because all of these pieces of embroidery are hand done. And you can see on the inside of the hem how skillfully it was done. And so I've learned a lot about my grandmother through her pieces, and the number one thing that comes to mind is that not only was she able to identify quality clothing, but also the way that she expressed herself through her clothing. She chose very expressive garments, and I don't mean like over the top or loud. I mean that there was always something about them and their design that would have caught your eye a little bit. You can really get a sense, I think, of her personality through her clothing. And for someone that I never had the opportunity to meet, it's something that I care a lot about getting to know, especially because then I can also connect the clothes with the stories that my mother tells me about her. Next is this green velvet jacket. It's almost like an acid green. I'm not sure if the colors are coming across on camera very well. Let me bring it a little bit closer. It's a beautiful velvet. It's from the 1950s. You know, it's towards the least sentimental side of things, but I chose this because it was the first piece of vintage I bought when I moved to New York. I bought this from the Manhattan Vintage Show, I think in 2023, I want to say. I also have a complicated relationship with vintage. I have a complicated relationship with everything, but vintage in particular for a lot of reasons, like not even getting into the like socio-political side of things where vintage style, not vintage values comes into play, and like the political nature of vintage, but also just, you know, vintage clothing often doesn't fit me anymore. And so I've had to like deal with that and, you know, body issues or body image issues and self-confidence that comes with wanting so desperately to wear something and knowing that I am going to be hard pressed to find it. So I don't buy a lot of vintage anymore, actually. I wear a lot of secondhand, a lot of hand-me-downs, things from friends and family. So buying this was rather important to me because, you know, I'm just constantly going through that negotiation when it comes to vintage. And although it doesn't fit me perfectly, it still fits me well enough. And when I moved to New York, I knew that New York was going to be like a paragon of fashion and a paragon of, you know, vintage and just, you know, cool and unique style. So getting to actually purchase something that exemplified that for me was really exciting. And I will always fondly remember this as the first piece of vintage I bought when I moved to New York. I apologize for the fact that things are moving around. I've had some technical difficulties filming this video as per usual, but we are on to our last piece. This is a 1930s, 1940s velvet bed jacket. Yes, you would wear this in bed. And it has this really beautiful lace around the collar. I bought this at a current affair vintage market in Los Angeles when I was doing the first round of my field research for my master's thesis. I did not go to the shows that I studied with the intention of buying anything because I was studying vintage markets, but this came from a vendor who I have seen at multiple vintage shows, both on the East and West Coasts. And I love to support my vintage vendors whenever I go to a vintage event. So I saw this piece at a current affair and I just had to take it home. And the vendor that this is from is also just a very good salesperson, so I can't resist buying something from them when I see them. And I don't know if you can tell, with this piece, but I'm a bit of a sucker for velvet. I don't actually wear these pieces very often, but when I do, I love it. So this is on the least sentimental end of the spectrum, but it is still very special to me because it represents the first time I ever got to go do field research. I've done field work in archaeology before, but doing my own original research is represented by this little bed jacket that I have, and yeah, that's why it's really special to me. So that is a selection of my most sentimental clothing from my wardrobe. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a little bit different than the type of content I tend to make, but I do have a master's degree in fashion studies after all, and I do truly love talking about fashion, and not just, the high fashion and the celebrity and all that kind of stuff, but the everyday, the memory of it all, the way that clothing is a part of our identity and what it means to us. So I want to talk about it more often. I want to share with you guys the thoughts that I have, even if they're not beautiful prose like my video about my dad's shirt is. I hope that you found this somewhat interesting. You probably learned a lot about me and my history and my past through these pieces of clothing, which isn't something I was really expecting when I went to film this video. I just wanted to talk about sentimental clothing for a little while. So I hope you learned something interesting. I will leave resources to some of the texts that I referenced below. And now it's your turn. I want you to go into the comments and share with me just one piece of sentimental fashion that you have. Get it out of your closet, feel it, touch it, look at it, spend some time with it, think about the memories that it holds, and then tell me a story about it in the comments. I am genuinely curious to see what kind of memories and thoughts come up for you. Is it a party dress that you wore to maybe like prom or something? Is it a piece of your parents' clothing that's been passed on to you? Even if it's a sad memory, is this something that helps you process the difficult feelings from that event? Whatever it is, I want to hear it. So thank you for joining me today in my little itty bitty closet. Sorry for the mess. This is my experimentation station where I play around with new outfits. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, everybody. Can you see it? I love you. Oh, I love you. What else can I do? Okay, focus, Katie. Also, did you notice that I actually got myself a microphone? We're moving up in the world, folks.